Are you all warmed up?
All right, man. Let it roll.
And we're back. We're back with David Bishop. I'm Mark Fairhurst, representing the Mercatus contingent in this recording. David is our friendly neighborhood brick meets click analyst, partner, all of guy around town, knows it all in grocery retail. So happy to have you back, David.
Well, Mark, appreciate that introduction. I don't like to be considered a know-it-all, but you say so. I guess I'll take the tag.
We are here discussing, among other things, March 2024 eGrocery sales numbers. But before we get into that, and I don't want to spend too much time in it, I want the audience to understand that we're going to take a different approach here. We're going to take a 30,000 foot level view of what's been going on of late and converse around some topical items that relate to the insights that we uncover month over month, or at least reflect on month over month. And we'll also forecast, hint, hint, what's coming, and then anything else that may pop into our brains.
There you go. We're going to focus on the forest through the trees.
100%. So let's get the number out of the way for March, and then we'll move on.
Yeah. All right. So that's my cue?
That's your cue.
So really exciting headline, Mark. eGrocery sales are year over year were flat, unchanged in 2024. That's at the top line. Obviously, beneath that, within the methods, a surprise came out of here. Shipt to home actually was the primary grower.
Interesting.
You can use that. And again, I think when we step back and look at the broader trend, one could argue or suggest that maybe, we've seen kind of the bottoming out of the Shipt to home, and that, the retrenchment is complete. We're kind of back onto a new upward cycle, if you will. But, we can talk about that. But other than that, delivery was down this month and pickup was flat. So there's a variety of reasons for that. But again, stepping back away from the month-to-month view, given that it's the 4-year anniversary.
I was just going to say that 4 years since we've been doing this. Time
flies.
But
actually, just not to take the attention off you, Mark, but when I said 4-year anniversary, I really meant 4-year anniversary since the onset of the pandemic, and how it has changed our lives and our businesses.
Okay, let's put the focus back. Let's put the focus back on me for a minute. It's 4 years since we've been doing these monthly insights.
It's crazy.
And a lot has certainly transpired. So over that 4-year period, again, I don't want to dwell on it, but we're still up significantly from where we were pre-COVID.
Absolutely. I mean, pre-COVID, the baseline for total eGrocery was $2 million. So, we're at $8 billion and we're flat. But again, we pulled forward a lot of demand in the early part of the pandemic. We're out of the pandemic now. And I think the optimistic way of looking at it is a lot of it has stayed. But understandably, a good portion has gone out. I mean, it could be 20 to 30% relative to what segment we're looking at. That's just kind of the natural reaction to the changing proposition. I mean, if you think about online grocery in March of 2020, it sure as heck wasn't really about convenience. It was about just getting groceries, right?
100%.
You remember stores were throttling in-store traffic, really encouraging people to go online. We didn't know a whole lot of anything, the stay-at-home orders. So it was a necessity as a way to get, those essential groceries. I mean, we don't have those same, environmental factors today. So understandably, some of those people who were using it back then because of those reasons are no longer using it today because they still prefer to shop in physical store, which is, understandable.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. When I was just having this conversation this week, understandably, you have a lot of regional retailers who have seen a drop off year over year in their eGrocery sales on the order of 10 to 15%. Some significantly more. And when you ask, have you seen a commensurate increase in your in-store? And the answer is no. Where have those online shoppers that you did have a relationship with go?
When those kind of topics come up, I always kind of salivate because, it's like the kid in the candy shop that they may have all the data points to help understand where they go. I mean, for instance, if they have, the loyalty card data as well as the household identifier online, they should be able to determine, was this a new customer to our banner that came to us online during the pandemic and has since left, which would indicate that that wasn't a primary shopper of your business in the first place. Or, the more concerning would be, we can see that these were established existing customers of ours in the in-store environment. They shopped with us online, and now they're no longer shopping with us online, but worse and more troubling, they're also not shopping with us in store or, shifting it back. I think, that would be concerning. But again, we'd have to follow the data and see what the data tells us. The sneaking suspicion that most people have is, they've gone to Walmart or another value retailer like Aldi because of the ongoing price pressures that this inflation, although it's now receded quite a bit, has taken its toll on purchasing power, right? Yep. And if it's not groceries, it's auto insurance or it's shelter-related expenses with rent. So even though grocery inflation's come down, it's not the only pain point that's putting pressure on purchasing power. So for those reasons, it's hard to defend when you have all those things coming together on top of the fact that the motivation that attracted people to shop online in large part has gone away because the concern about contracting a respiratory illness, which at first was COVID, but then it was RSV and then the flu, that's dissipated. People have learned to deal with that. And really the people who are in the most sensitive class who can't afford to catch that, let alone probably a bug, they may still be there. So this is the time, like we continue to say, to reassess your assumptions about the business. Is it going to grow the way it used to grow? I mean, we can talk about that at a later date. And how has the business changed from a competitive standpoint? It is not the same as it was.
And it's funny that you mentioned that as well, because in as much as we've talked about the increasing level of cross-shopping and the leakage to mass merchants like Walmart and Target, you also have, at least at the regional supermarket level, competitors who have invested in what you could call best-in-class operations, technology, but they also have a strategy and a plan to execute against that strategy, and that's where your customers could also be bleeding to.
Yeah, completely. I mean, again, we can get distracted by the next shiny object and pursue that thinking it's going to be some panacea, some silver bullet, and then eventually find out it just doesn't pan out, or it involves a lot more than we expected, or it's just too far in front of where the customer expectations are today. So, it's not sexy, but we keep coming back to looking at strategy and how sound that strategy is. And when we look at what retailers do, we try to build an activity system that links those various tactics together to see what order or fit that they're providing. Yeah. If it's just consistency, that's not enough. We need to find ways to reduce the cost. That's a second order fit, and then optimize ideally. This is the third level of fit that really needs to occur. And those who are kind of in the best in class camp, Mark, and without naming names, I believe are really doing a good job or a better job of getting to that third order fit where one activity reinforces another activity and optimizes the entire value chain so that they can deliver more value while reducing that cost.
I agree. I mean, in your point about the shiny objects, and let's talk about the story this week. Well, actually, a couple of stories. Last week was Kroger's announcement of shutting down some of the Ocado sheds, as well as Amazon's pullback from their walkout tech, and then Giant's announcement of relying on a 3PL for undisclosed 3PL for delivery. What's your sense of these recent stories?
Well, I think what I can take away looking at it differently than maybe some of the others, questioning whether it works or not, but to say they finally have come to the conclusion that their assumptions were invalid. If you take, for instance, the MFC discussion, whether it's Kroger or Giant, there was this assumption that we're going to be able to drive all these efficiencies through these automated facilities. The underlying assumption was that there was going to be enough volume to utilize the necessary capacity to make those numbers work because of both the capital expenditure as well as the ongoing operating expenses. Mm-hmm. And I think what they've learned, and it may not be a surprise to others because we've looked at this, is that in order for them to, well, first of all, the first problem was there wasn't enough volume or throughput to meet the requirements to sustain that level of investment. And then secondly, in order to drive that much volume through there, you were pulling from a larger radius and then offsetting those gains with incremental costs associated with distributing from those facilities. It reinforced the lack of a sustainable path forward. But I think also in some cases where I think these sheds that Kroger had were in kind of green markets without physical
Correct.
Stores, not all of them, but Florida in particular is an example of an assumption that they made that they could grow their online presence in a market without a physical presence.
That's right.
We've known since 2017, at least, that would be a very hard ask, because one of the things that we saw when Amazon acquired Whole Foods was they wanted proximity to the end consumer to address what everyone likes to affectionately call last mile, but also because they wanted a different connection with or relationship with the customer. They wanted a more emotional connection versus just a transactional one, right? Get me what I want, get it as fast and as cheap as I want. That doesn't necessarily play the same in grocery when you're talking about some categories that could pose high risk to a consumer if they don't get what they want, right? Whether it's making a meal or a recipe. And not having a physical presence may have caused a perception issue in the mind of the consumer. And I'm speculating here, Mark, which is you're delivering fresh food to me, but you don't have stores nearby. Whereas if I order from my local grocer, it may not come from that store, but I still may perceive that it's coming from the store that's just down the block from me. That's and therefore, right. There's not an issue of the cold chain. And let's keep in mind, it was not a price issue for Kroger in Florida because they were lower priced online than the market leader, in this case, Publix. It could have been a brand awareness issue, but I don't know how much that really is the case, because I think most people would know who Kroger is in those markets, but they may not have been very familiar with that service, and therefore, the trust they had in the service may have been questionable. I'm just speculating.
You're speculating, yeah.
So the point here is, okay, now they've come to roost, and then you look at Giant, the same thing. We see this retrenchment on the delivery side, and while what Giant's doing makes sense in the sense of partnering in a white label format with an undisclosed third party to distribute that delivery order from, their store or fulfillment center to the customer, what we see is some people completely just throwing their hands up and saying, I'm just going to give my delivery business to the third party, which is then a focus on the marketplace.
The lessons and the advice that we've been providing is completely the contrary. So it's interesting, the decision making that was likely fueling this decision.
Yeah, there are two schools of thought when it comes to market share. So the historical view for technology is sales over profit. So they're going to grow market share at the expense of profit. And historically, grocers really push back at that. In fact, one of the things that flummoxed them early on was, how do we compete with someone who values sales over profit? Well, now we're looking at this, and we should be looking at, okay, well, are retailers now adopting a technology mindset of putting sales over profit? Because you could argue that it may be the case if someone is reliant entirely on third-party marketplaces to cover their delivery business, as opposed to focus on, growing share profitably, right? Because going forward, the issue is going to be, well, if we're focused on growth, period, what's the best path forward? I think a focus on profit, especially now, is going to become more important, more relevant, simply because the incremental growth that's out there is
so
going
little.
to be much more expensive because there's so little of it.
Yeah, it's again, we're not going to speculate who the 3PL is, but I have my guess.
What are you seeing? You talked about the best in class and some regionals taking away from others, Mark. What are some of the kind of the bucket areas that you would kind of put your finger on, saying, here's some examples of why someone may be winning and someone may be struggling?
I think those regionals that understand, and this goes back to what you talked about at the beginning, that it's not a game of acquisition. It's now shifted to repeat purchase frequency and getting more out of the customers that you currently have in terms of building the basket. And in the age-old focus on customer experience, operational excellence, and making sure that you're not doing anything, for example, with out of stocks or substitutions that cause a customer to rethink the experience that they've had through e-commerce. So I think those retailers that understand that side of the equation are the ones that are being successful today. One last topic is the Amazon walkout technology, and we're seeing that I think Whole Foods as well is pulling back from this. What's you and I we went to the Amazon Fresh store, and there's a video on it. So it's I'm curious, what's your assessment of this pullback from Amazon?
Been an interesting experiment to watch. Like you said, Mark, you and I think Sylvain actually visited two stores in the same market here in Chicago, one that had the dash cart and one that utilized the just walkout technology. Just coincidentally, and really just sheer happenstance, it happened. In the just walkout example, I had 2 or 3 items in the basket, and they were expensive because they were alcohol that did not get charged. Yep. And I didn't know that when I walked out. And this was also at a time when they had a staff member positioned at the just walkout lane and verified that everything looked good. In this case, they had to check my ID, but they didn't do any further due diligence. And I ended up walking away with, I dare not say the amount of money, but it was enough that
was this for your mother? This was
yes, it was. Yeah,
her favorite.
I mean, I was trying to buy 6 bottles of wine. I think I ended up buying 3 or 4, but I got the other 2 for free. And it wasn't for the lack of also trying to get a refund. Now, as I told you, I wasn't going to drive back to this store. It wasn't in my town. It wasn't close, but I did reach out to them and never heard anything back. And I just think the act of having to scan to get into a grocery store was an odd experience. And I think Amazon understood that. In that environment, we have choice, and I may just choose to go somewhere where I don't have to scan before I can get in. In a stadium or in a small environment where you have especially a captive audience like a stadium, that's different, where speed is of essence and the assortment is much more limited.
An airport, right?
Yeah. And we also were we were also intrigued when Amazon opened another Just Walkout in the Chicagoland area, and we were preparing to go to it on its grand opening day, but for whatever circumstances, and I'm going to loosely connect it to the Just Walkout, they couldn't open on time. They had to delay the grand opening because they lost power to the entire store. And part of the thinking was, just like with the advent of the electric vehicle, these stores put an incredible strain on the electrical grid that's supporting them. And just like we've heard about some subdivisions in our area that may require electrical upgrades if another house gets another electric vehicle. The same thing with these stores. These stores were pulling so much power and requiring so much processing power because they were having to process so much data in real time between the cloud and the store. You just saw one issue beget another issue, and it was just snowballing. It was not a sustainable path in the large box. So, hopefully in the small box, they figured it out. But my concern is if Amazon's not going to take advantage of the technology in its own stores, why should anyone else, unless it's been proven to be effective? Because my concern would be, even if I'm a concession stand at a ballpark or a convenience store, hearing my story about 2 bottles of wine walking out the front door.
That's significant.
And again, how do we know that's not happening somewhere else? And the point is, we don't. And the only way that those customers who are contracting with Amazon with that would find out would be if they're auditing the system to verify and reconcile that what has been taken has been paid for. And, I don't have visibility into that, but that's where I think, the rubber will meet the road. And I'm confident that the food service companies who are using it and testing it in stadiums will hopefully quickly figure that out. I mean, I came from that background long ago. So I know the controls that we would put in place to verify that. So my hope is that it works as designed there. My concern is, based on the revelations that we've learned thus far, that there are not necessarily any assurances publicly that that's the case. And within the contract, I don't know what the arbitration issue is if there are, problems like that.
Yeah. Well, it was an interesting experiment. And to your point, those other retailers who are looking at this technology now clearly are going to be second guessing any decision to utilize it. We've come to the end of the show for us this month. David, I appreciate your time. Do you want to let the audience know what to look out for in the coming weeks?
Yeah. In just a few weeks, we will be releasing our much awaited sales forecast, our 5-year sales forecast that looks at not just eGrocery, but total grocery, and also breaks down eGrocery into its 3 respective receiving methods.
Yeah. And I know one retailer in particular, one contact at a retailer who's going to be very excited to get an early copy of that report.
Oh, yeah. And I have a couple who have called and asked when it will be coming out. And I told them it would be in the middle of the month. And so for those listening, if you're interested, reach out to Mark at Mercatus, as they are our exclusive sponsor of that work. And we appreciate that ongoing support, Mark. And we'll go from there.
Perfect. Awesome. David, thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next month.
Sounds good, Mark. Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.